Well, today I want to ask some honest and difficult questions about what's going on. And the question I really want to focus on today is, who on earth is in charge? I mean, has anyone got a handle on this thing? If we say God is in control, the Lord reigns, then what on earth is going on around us? Because right now, it doesn't seem like God is in control. It doesn't seem like anyone's in control. I remember my first ever driving lesson. My Uncle John took me to a car park, and I remember putting the foot down on the pedal and the car lurching forward. And from that moment, this sensation of fear developed, because it really felt like rather than driving the car was driving me. But my uncle seemed remarkably confident in my abilities, and we drove out into town, and we were driving down this small country lane, and again I was gripping the steering wheel, and a car came towards us, and I was thinking, this is not going to work. And I lurched the steering wheel. We veered over to the curb, on which point I hit a manhole cover. There was an explosion, and I burst the tyre. And my uncle rather sheepishly took control and said, I'll take it from here, Tom. And that sensation of feeling out of control is one that's not only scary, but it's nauseating. And maybe you feel like events have taken over and you are gripping the steering wheel, but at any moment you're fearful that things are going to crash. Last week, a community nurse, part of our congregation, messaged me, and she said, honestly, work is arduous and challenging at the moment. Lots of very sick end-of-life folk, young and old, with less staff as people have succumbed to the virus. I feel overwhelmed with it all. I wonder if you are feeling overwhelmed, out of control. And it's very easy for me to sit here on the sidelines and say, well, the government should be in control. But then, of course, the goalposts keep changing. The virus mutates, and they have to change everything again. I find it an irony that corona means crown. And maybe we're tempted to kind of throw our hands up and say, well, the only thing that's in control is this virus. And for the people of faith, this is a real challenge, because we live our lives under the assumption that God is in control of events, that God is protecting us and he is at work in our lives. But when events seem to take over, it really catches us off guard. And that's why it's sometimes difficult to read Psalms like Psalm 99 that Flo read to us, which say things like, the Lord reigns, let the nations tremble. He sits enthroned between the cherubim. Let the earth shake. And you couldn't have a more powerful picture. It's an image of a ruler whose authority extends not only over every nation, but also over the whole of creation. Let the earth shake. And this position of power between these two powerful cherubim, these angels, is one from which he issues instructions and decrees, he makes judgments and appoints his subjects. And this speaks to our belief that God not only created the world and then somehow stood back, but know that he is intimately involved in running the world, that God is in control. And this leads to this honest question. Well, what is he doing? I mean, is he asleep on the job? Because the last time I looked, the death rate around the world is soaring at a startling rate. There is so much suffering around us. And on the surface of it, it looks like things are out of control. So what do we do? I mean, are we to just conclude that God is powerless in the face of this? Well, I found it really encouraging to go back to a strange little incident that happened just a few days before Jesus' crucifixion. And the mother of James and John, who were two of Jesus' closest disciples, they came to him. She came with a question to Jesus. And this woman had been watching Jesus exert incredible power and authority. Power over sickness and over the forces of nature, and even over death as he raised a man from the dead. And so she had this growing sense, along with many of the people around Jesus, that this must be the promised Messiah. And so she has a question for Jesus. She wants to know how much power and authority her sons will have when Jesus takes the throne as king over all Israel. And it's a question that gets to the very heart of our basic human desire, not to be subjected, but to have power and agency over our own lives. But this question provokes this big flare-up amongst the disciples. They're going, how dare you ask such a question? So Jesus pulls them all together and he says this: you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Jesus says, look, if you are looking to the Roman Empire for any model of leadership, you've got to forget it. And that is not real power, although it looks powerful. And Jesus goes on, instead, whoever wants to become great amongst you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be the first must be your slave. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And I love this. There is such deep wisdom here about the true nature of power. For in this moment, Jesus redefines power. And the disciples learn 3 critical lessons about God's power. The first is that God's power serves you. God's power is focused on serving your needs. Maybe you've had a domineering boss and you're constantly on call, having to jump through hoops to meet his demands. But in the psalm, this is totally reversed. We read that the people called out to God and he answered them. It's a picture of God who is in a state of readiness, waiting to help us whenever we call to him. We see far too many examples of self-serving power, of power turned in on itself. But Jesus speaks of a power that does not seek to dominate, but seeks to serve. What if the most powerful government is the one who is constantly serving its citizens? What if the most powerful person in your company is not the one with the highest rank, but the person who is secretly out to serve the needs of their colleagues and customers. When you compare the power of Jesus to those we consider to be the most powerful in the world, there is no comparison between them. That's why I love that quote from Napoleon Bonaparte about Jesus. And he said, between him and every other person in the world, there is no possible term of comparison. Alexander, Caesar, Charlemagne, and I have founded empires. But on what did we rest the creations of our genius? Upon force. Jesus Christ founded his empire upon love. Secondly, God's power frees you. And the psalm tells of God reaching out to rescue this enslaved nation from the grips of Egyptian slavery and setting them free. And this tells us something significant about the focus of God's power. For God's power is always focused on freeing us when we feel trapped. And Jesus' mission was to set you free from everything that holds you back. That's why he said, I have come to give my life as a ransom for many. I've come to pay the ultimate price so that you can walk free. Free from any past regrets, free from any shame that you might carry around, free from ever feeling like you are on your own. But more than that, for I have come to set you free from death. From death having the last word in your life. For we have a king who has conquered death, who rose from the grave. And this transforms how we grieve. We are in this moment of great national mourning. We've just passed that grim milestone of 100,000 deaths from COVID. And it's unimaginably tragic. And Jesus wept at the tomb of Lazarus, his friend. And we are all grieving at this time. Which is why this is a moment for us to be constantly checking in with one another. Constantly phoning and messaging, how are you doing? How are you coping? Is there anything I can do to help you with? How can I pray for you? And I'm so grateful for all the ways that you're doing that at this time. But I like what Paul wrote to the Thessalonians. He wrote this, we grieve, but not like those who have no hope. In other words, we have deep sadness, yes, but not despair, not hopelessness, for Jesus Christ has defeated death. And so God's power frees you. And then finally, God's power works through you. Jesus said, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And this brings us to perhaps the most remarkable aspect of God's power at work. God rules, but not often as we imagine, as like a powerful monarch sweeping away all before him. God rules the world through you and me. For we are made in God's image. And in Jesus Christ, God not only meets our cry for help, not only rescues us from everything that's holding us back, but he also sets us to work to bring blessing and peace and comfort and joy into a world in desperate need. I don't know about you, but so often I look out at the world and with all its disasters, and I wonder to myself, why doesn't God just march in and take control? In all his power, why doesn't he send lightning bolts and sort things out and put things right? But the answer is that God does send thunderbolts, human thunderbolts. He has chosen to act through you and I. And we are more powerful than any king, for we use our initiative. We feed the hungry. We stand beside those who are crying out in pain. We care for the sick. That is how God has chosen to outwork his remarkable power in these times. Amen.